It started like any other luxury flight, with the hum of jet engines and the quiet shuffle of designer shoes across plush carpet. A private plane, cruising high above the clouds, filled with an air of quiet elegance. But what happened next would turn this flight into a story no one on board would ever forget. It began when a woman, dressed in simple but elegant clothes, boarded the jet with calm confidence. She didn't flash wealth or demand attention, she simply took her seat in silence. But that was enough to spark something unexpected. The flight attendant, young and polished, looked at her with a judgmental eye. Maybe it was the way she dressed. Maybe it was her skin color. Or maybe it was the quiet power she carried without saying a word. Whatever it was, tension filled the air. A simple misunderstanding quickly escalated when the attendant, assuming she was just a passenger who didn't belong, became rude, then disrespectful. Words were exchanged. And in a moment that shocked everyone, the flight attendant did something unthinkable. She slapped the woman. Gasps echoed through the cabin. Silence fell. What no one knew, not the other passengers, not even the pilot, was that the woman sitting there, stunned and still, was no ordinary traveler. She wasn't just on the plane. She *owned the plane. She was the billionaire behind the very airline they were flying on. A powerful businesswoman known in elite circles, but private enough that few recognized her face. And now everything had changed. The slap wasn't just an insult, it was a career-ending mistake. But she didn't react the way anyone expected. She didn't shout. She didn't demand anything. She simply looked up and smiled. And that's when the real story began. The smile on her face wasn't loud or threatening. It was calm, controlled, and almost too quiet for the moment. It was the kind of smile that made people nervous, like something much bigger was coming. The flight attendant took a small step back, her confidence suddenly shaky. But she still didn't realize who she was dealing with. To her, this woman was just another passenger who got out of line. No VIP tag, no red carpet entrance, just a black woman sitting in first class alone. But her name was Ava Sinclair. Behind closed doors, she was known as a silent powerhouse in aviation and tech, with shares in multiple companies, including the very one that operated this jet. She built her empire without flashy headlines, choosing to invest in people and ideas quietly. Her wealth didn't wear labels, her success didn't need a spotlight, and that's why no one on board recognized her. As the plane soared through the sky, tension pressed against the cabin walls. The other passengers sat frozen, unsure of what they'd just witnessed. Ava said nothing. She didn't need to. Her assistant, seated 2 rows back and pretending to be just another passenger, had already typed a few messages on her phone. Every detail was being documented. Meanwhile, the flight attendant paced nervously near the galley, whispering to a coworker. She still didn't know the full truth, but something about Ava's silence was starting to feel dangerous. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of someone with options. Powerful ones. The kind that didn't raise voices, but moved entire companies with a single call. And as the plane continued its journey, the question started growing in everyone's mind. Who really had the power here? The answer was coming, and no one was ready for it. Back near the front of the cabin, the co-pilot stepped out for a moment, casually glancing down the aisle. His eyes met Ava's for a second, just long enough for something to click. Recognition. A quick double take, and then a glance at the flight manifest. His jaw tightened. He leaned toward the head attendant and whispered something. Whatever he said made her eyes widen. Now the truth was starting to leak out, but the damage had already been done. Meanwhile, Ava stayed in her seat, hands folded, calm as ever. She wasn't the type to make a scene. She didn't have to. Her presence alone made people pay attention. She quietly pulled out her phone, scrolling through emails, responding to a message from her legal team without breaking her smile. The real storm was moving behind the scenes now. Quietly, strategically. In the back of the plane, 2 passengers, young entrepreneurs who had recognized Ava from a closed investor meeting months ago. whispered to each other. They kept quiet until now, unsure if it was really her. But the more they watched her, the more they were certain. One of them took out his phone and began recording, not the slap, but the reactions, the atmosphere, the shift in energy. Something big was happening, and he knew this story wouldn't stay private for long. Up front, the flight attendant was visibly shaken, now piecing things together. She tried to smooth her uniform and regain control, but her voice wavered as she made the next announcement. The staff exchanged glances. The power dynamic on the flight had completely flipped. No one said it out loud, but they all felt it. And Ava, she was still waiting, still watching, not for revenge, but for the right moment. The kind of moment that could shift careers, reputations, maybe even the future of the airline itself. The air inside the cabin grew heavier with every passing minute. Conversations had died down, eyes flickered toward Ava more frequently, and whispers moved like waves through the seats. The pilot remained in the cockpit, radaring quietly with the airline's main office, trying to confirm the passenger list without alerting the rest of the crew. But the truth was already moving faster than the flight itself. Ava's assistant, still blending in with the passengers, received a quiet message back. Confirmed. Proceed as discussed. She nodded slightly and tapped her screen a few more times, sending a signal that would set off a chain reaction far beyond the plane. Phone calls, emails, quiet alarms in executive offices. The wheels were turning. The flight attendant, now pale and tense, attempted to approach Ava with a forced smile. "Would you like anything to drink?" she asked, voice trembling just beneath the surface. Ava looked up slowly. Her eyes held no anger, just clarity. Calm, controlled, and unreadable. "No thank you," she said softly. The attendant nodded too quickly and stepped away, hands shaking. She still didn't know exactly how much trouble she was in, but her instincts were screaming. This wasn't a regular complaint. This was something bigger. The two entrepreneurs in the back had stopped whispering. One of them was texting a mutual contact, someone in venture capital who had once mentioned Ava's influence. The other kept recording, quietly capturing the mood shift, the unease, the silent storm building in that cabin. And then, just as the cabin lights dimmed for landing prep, a flight supervisor boarded mid-air from the staff quarters. Unusual, unscheduled, and clearly not there for standard protocol. He moved with purpose, eyes scanning the cabin before locking in on Ava. The atmosphere snapped tight. Something was about to happen. Everyone could feel it. The flight supervisor's footsteps were firm and deliberate, his polished shoes tapping softly against the aisle carpet as he moved toward Ava's seat. The rest of the cabin held its breath. This wasn't standard procedure. No one boards mid-flight unless something serious is happening. Even the co-pilot emerged from the cockpit again, watching closely, tension stretched tight across his face. When the supervisor finally reached Ava, he gave a respectful nod. "Miss Sinclair," he said in a quiet, steady tone, "I apologize for the disruption. May I speak with you privately?" Ava looked at him, then around the cabin. Everyone was watching. She stood calmly, smoothed the front of her blouse, and followed him to the private lounge section at the front of the plane. The door shut behind them, and whispers exploded behind it. But what no one saw, what even the supervisor hadn't expected, was that Ava wasn't just dealing with one incident today. As they spoke behind closed doors, her assistant was watching a live feed from the company's private security team. Something had triggered an internal audit earlier that morning. A high-level investigation had flagged the very flight crew assigned to this plane, not just for misconduct, but for a series of quiet, unreported complaints involving racial bias and discrimination. And the flight attendant who had slapped Ava, she was already on that list. Now, Ava wasn't just a billionaire quietly taking note of bad service. She was a chairwoman in the middle of uncovering something bigger, systemic, hidden behind polished uniforms and rehearsed smiles. The slap had simply pulled the curtain back. What started as a personal insult was quickly becoming a corporate crisis. And just as the supervisor began to explain that the board had already been notified, Ava's phone buzzed. A message lit up her screen. Asterisk media leak in progress. Prepare for response. Asterisk. The stakes had just changed, and the world was about to find out. Inside the private lounge, the supervisor's voice dropped to a low, urgent tone. The board is aware. Legal has been briefed. We're fully prepared to issue a statement and suspend the crew immediately. We deeply regret what happened, Miss Sinclair. Ava listened, expression unreadable, her fingers slowly scrolling through the alert on her phone. The media leak had begun. Someone had already sent the video clip, blurry but clear enough, of the slap, the shock, and the chilling calm that followed. Outside, the flight crew stood frozen. The attendant who struck Ava had pieced the truth together too late. Her hands trembled as she stared at her phone, watching her own face spread across social media. Comments flooded in, the hashtags started trending, and the silence in the cabin grew heavier with each new ping of notification. Ava stood slowly, thanked the supervisor, and walked back into the main cabin. All eyes turned to her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't scold. She simply picked up the intercom, calmly addressed the passengers, and introduced herself, not with arrogance, but with quiet power. "My name is Ava Sinclair," she said, "and I own this aircraft, and the company behind it. What happened today will not go unanswered." The cabin broke into murmurs. The tension snapped. Some applauded. Others just sat in stunned silence. The flight attendant was escorted to the back of the plane, no longer in control, her career unraveling in real time. But just as the landing gear lowered and the city lights came into view, Ava received one last message. It wasn't from legal or her assistant. It was from the woman who had anonymously submitted the first complaint against that flight crew months ago. It read, asterisk, "Thank you. I thought no one would ever believe me." Asterisk. And in that final moment, Ava smiled, not for revenge, but for justice finally catching up. The slap was loud, but her silence had been louder. As the plane touched down and slowly rolled to a stop on the private runway, the weight of everything that had happened still lingered in the air. Passengers stood quietly, unsure of what to say or do. Some gave Ava small nods of respect as they passed her, no words needed. The flight attendant, now escorted off the aircraft, didn't meet anyone's eyes. Her future with the airline had ended the moment she let her assumptions guide her actions. Ava remained seated until the cabin was nearly empty. Her assistant walked over, holding out the phone with a soft look. The board issued the statement. Internal investigations are opening today. Media's calling it a turning point. Ava took the phone and glanced at the headlines. Her name, her story, the clip, it had all gone public. But instead of chaos, there was support, people speaking up, former employees sharing their own quiet stories. What started on a plane at 30,000 feet was now sparking change on the ground. She stepped off the jet and looked back once, not with anger, but with quiet strength. This wasn't about embarrassment or revenge. It was about accountability. About how power doesn't always wear a suit or demand attention. Sometimes it walks in quietly, observes, and acts when it matters most. Later that evening, back in her office overlooking the city, Ava reviewed the incoming reports. She approved funding for a new internal ethics program across the airline, not for show, but for real change. She didn't need to make noise. Her presence was enough. The story of the flight attendant slapping the billionaire